It's a Monday. Thank you so much for joining us here on the JMULL show, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. We're not live again. I'm having computer issues. I've come to the realization that it's not the internet. It's just the computer. It needs some updating, some something. But thank you so much for joining us here on a Monday, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. It's an NBA, jam-packed NBA day. Really excited for this show. The playoffs start today. We got 4 games today. We'll get to those here at about 11:40 as part of playoff predictions. We're not going to predict the entire playoffs. We'll just start with round 1 and the games that I think could the number of games that each series will take, and the number of games each series will take, and the ultimate winner. At 11:20, we'll talk about my 1 through 16 power rankings of those 16 teams in the playoffs. Essentially, the teams that we're ranking the teams 1 through 16 that I think are most likely to win an NBA championship. Not as much on current form or anything, if that makes any sense. But we'll do that at about 11:20. But what I want to start with first is the playing games and some of my final thoughts of the regular season. We'll start with the playing game. I thought it was spectacular. I really did. I'm a really big fan of just playoff basketball in general, and it felt like playoff basketball. And I talked a lot about this prior to the beginning of the bubble in terms of just what the intensity would feel like. I thought it would be a little difficult to get as much intensity as possible, but I was pretty wrong about that. And from a production side of things, it's gotten better from the mixing of things. The stuff in the arena was almost too loud and was drowning out the commentators, and it just felt even more unnatural than it actually was. But they've gotten better from a production side of things, and it just feels like an NBA game. And it feels like the Lakers Clippers game right off the start felt like a high intensity regular season game between two teams that are have sort of become rivals because of their they're both in points of contention for the NBA title, and they play in the same building, and that carried over into the bubble. And I wasn't sure how much that would carry over into the bubble, if that makes sense, because you even had players say, I'm worried that it's going to be a difficult, just a high intensity. I mean, not even high intensity, just a pickup game, a scrimmage that's not in front of anybody, which is really, which hasn't been the case. And that was the same could be said for the playing game between the Grizzlies and the Trailblazers. First, I want to start with the Grizzlies. What the Grizzlies have done. What the Grizzlies did in the playoffs, I still think that they were the team that most deserved to be in that playing game. And I think that's going to be pretty unpopular opinion because of what the Suns did to go 8-0, but it's an entire body of work. When you look at the two, this is an 8-game stretch. If the 8-game stretch for the Phoenix Suns, if they went 8-0 between games 25 and 33 and then miss the playoffs by half a game, then then you wouldn't be saying they deserve it because that 8-0 stretch. You know what I mean? Like that wouldn't be the case. That wouldn't be what we're talking about here. We wouldn't be complaining, seeing on Twitter that the Suns deserve it more. The Suns should have won more basketball games prior to the bubble. You know what I mean? That's not to say that the Grizzlies were spectacular in the bubble. That's not to say that there's an inherent reason why the Grizzlies deserved it more. but they didn't deserve it less, and the Suns definitely didn't deserve it more. The Grizzlies, over the entire body of work, however many games it was, 72. I can't remember if the Grizzlies have played 65 yet when the season was suspended, but 72, 73, somewhere in the low 70s. Over that stretch of games, they were just as good as that stretch of games for Phoenix, those 70-something games. The Suns just got hot at the very end and made it more interesting. But this idea that they deserve it more because they played better in the bubble is silly. Silly. I mean, the Mets have been... I can't tell you how many times the New York Mets have been really good except for August and September. And then they choke it. And you think that just because they missed out because they were good earlier, that they still deserve it? It's the same thing here. We're talking about an entire body of work. Would the Suns have been a more interesting playing game? Maybe. But the Grizzlies showed up, and Ja Morant showed up in a playoff intensity game, which I think is a big deal for the Grizzlies. And anybody who's a Grizzlies fan should be really proud of the performance that the Grizzlies put on, because at the end of the day, that's a better basketball team than the Grizzlies. Portland, I mean. That's a top 5 team in the West. We're going to get to my power rankings here, but even as an 8 seed, they're in my top 10 in power rankings in terms of most likely to win an NBA championship. Now, towards the back half, and nobody's predicting the Trailblazers to win a title, but that's a top 5. That's a second round. That's a team that should be playing the Lakers in the second round if they're healthy all year, not the first round. And to show up the way they did on Saturday, really it coming down to the last couple minutes of the game, and Carmelo Anthony not really sealing the game until there were 26 seconds left or whatever. That's a valiant performance. You got Valanciunas showed up, Ja Morant showed up, and you run it back next year with a healthy Justice Winslow and hopefully a healthy Jaren Jackson Jr. and you've got some fire to work with there. You've got some fire to work with there. You really do. Now, where it gets tough now is that next season you're probably going to have those 8 teams that are in the playoffs still be better than you. So we might still be looking at a Grizzlies team that is fighting to get an 8 seed. Like, that's certainly a possibility. But I think you saw that Ja Morant is up for playoffs. And I was on this show on Friday talking about how important it was that Ja Morant be aggressive and Ja Morant take over the game, and Ja Morant understand that he's the best player on the floor for the Memphis Grizzlies and that he needs to be aggressive and be very, very important for that team. And that's exactly what he did. So shouts to Ja for doing that. I was really impressed by him. At the end of the day, Portland's just a better basketball team. Somebody needs to guard Carmelo Anthony in the corner. I swear, he's going to win a playoff game because nobody guards him in the corner. I mean, Memphis didn't do it in the first game at the end of regulation. Thankfully, he missed it. So they were able to go to overtime. They ended up losing still. They didn't do it again here. Against Brooklyn, Brooklyn didn't guard Carmelo in the corner. He missed that shot too, but it didn't, Karis LeVert also missed, so it didn't end up mattering. Somebody please guard Carmelo Anthony in the last possession of games. I mean, he's a elite scorer. Now, he needs to be a better spotted three-point shooter because that's what he's going to be for the most part. Spotted three-point shooter. He'll pick and choose his spots, but for the most part, he needs to be ready to knock down shots when he has an open look because of the opportunities he gets from CJ and Dame. With that being said, the Grizzlies, put in a valiant performance. They certainly didn't not deserve to be there. That's a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, it's recency bias, and I get all of that, but it's still the same body of work as we were talking about back in March. And at that point, the Grizzlies, to use the phrase that everyone else has been using, the Grizzlies absolutely deserved it more than the Phoenix Suns. And 8 games shouldn't change that. If the Grizzlies stumbled down the stretch and Phoenix played well, and as a result, Phoenix just barely missed out on the 8 seed, hypothetically speaking, nobody would be saying that the Suns deserve it more. So why are we saying that now? Come on. It's silly. And that's coming from somebody. I mean, yes, I'm a Grizzlies fan. Yes, I've lived here for a long time in Memphis, and yes, the Grizzlies hold a special place in my heart. But this is coming from somebody who just I don't think it makes sense to be that upset about the Suns not getting the spot just because they had a hot stretch in the bubble and weren't all that great prior. Personally, I would have liked to see Portland versus Phoenix in that playing game. I really would have. I mean, it might not have been a better game because the Memphis Portland game ended up being very very good, but that would have been fascinating to watch. The team that probably it was the best of those bottom four, those four teams fighting for the spot in Portland, versus the team that was playing the best in Phoenix. It would have been very interesting. I was all for it because I thought it would be a lot of fun. And I thought the Grizzlies wouldn't be nearly as close as they ended up being, if I'm being honest, to winning that game and forcing a second playing game. But that's not what happened. The Grizzlies got that spot. They put up a good fight, and they deserved it just as much as Portland did, as Phoenix did, as San Antonio did. Whichever team you want to talk about that had a chance to be an 8 or 9 seed on that last day, on Thursday. Just because the outcome wasn't what you wanted it to be doesn't mean that you should be all upset about it. That's all I'm saying. But the plan was great. I'm a really big fan of single. We of course don't need to turn things into the NCAA tournament, but for postseason baseball, the wild card has been incredible. Incredible. The one game wild card has been awesome. I love it. It's consistently delivering, and it's consistently one of the single best games of the playoffs. And this game was awesome too. This idea of winner take all just gets me so excited. We all love the NCAA tournament for the carnage and the chaos that comes with a single elimination tournament. I think 7-game series are still the way to weed out the best team. But let me tell you, those playing games are fun. And I'm not sure, whether or not we need to. I don't think it's necessary to add this to every postseason where you have the 8 and the 9. The 9 has to beat the other team twice. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's, something that doesn't need to be done. But with that being said, it was a lot of fun. And it had playoff intensity. And it had a playoff feel. And it was a good way to kick off the playoffs because you had two solid basketball teams fighting for their lives and playing. The Portland's playing because now the pressure's all on them if they let it get to Sunday. And the Grizzlies, of course, are fighting for their season. And that's the idea of lose or win or go home just adds a level of intensity that the early parts of a 7-game series don't. And giving, the first round of the NBA playoffs for the most part are a snooze fest. It might be a little different this year just because there's no home court advantage. The Lakers are certainly a shell of themselves, and that's putting it nicely. But there you've got Philly is a 6 seed without Ben Simmons, but it'll be, it's certainly interesting. Philly and Boston. Miami and Indiana will be very, very interesting. Denver and Utah, OKC and Houston, even Dallas and the Clippers has their pull with Luka Doncic and that young Mavericks team that is good in a lot of ways. I'm not even a little bit predicting them to win that series, but there's a lot of reasons that the first round might be a little bit more interesting than it usually is. But adding that kind of playing game certainly adds a level of intensity and a level of excitement that the first round, for the most part, doesn't otherwise bring. And can you imagine if it was in somebody's home building? Can you imagine how awesome that would be? If you're just you've got 20,000 fans there. It would be so intense. It would be so awesome. I'm a big fan of the idea. It's ultimately unnecessary. I don't think it's something that needs to be done and put into the playoffs permanently. But it was a ton of fun to watch and a ton of fun to be a part of. And that was just game one. Imagine if there was a game two, the intensity would be even greater. But coming up next, we're gonna talk about my 1 through 16 power rankings on 110sportsmedia.com today, ahead of the playoffs, ranking the teams that are still alive from 1 to 16. We'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Monday. Thank you so much for joining us, making us a part of your day. Whether it's on Monday, whether it's on Tuesday, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about today, can spread throughout the next few days. So if it's Wednesday when you get to this, if it's even later than that, I mean, I think these power rankings will still carry some weight, and certainly my these first round playoff predictions will. Maybe if you're listening to this 4 days from now, I'll sound stupid. Maybe I'll sound really intelligent. I don't know. But thank you so much for joining us. 110sportsmedia.com. If you haven't checked, it's a busy day on the site. We got multiple power rankings, some draft regrades, 5 things from the week from Josh Doring. Lots of stuff going on over there at 110sportsmedia.com. So if you haven't checked those things out in the last couple of days, please do. We'd really appreciate it. But I want to talk about my 1 through 16 power rankings. And we talked about my power rankings last week, or I guess it was a week ago today. My power rankings basically, it might have been 9 days ago now. Anyways, my power rankings, taking into account how teams are playing, but also taking into account how they actually stand in the league. Phoenix was 4-0, 5-0 at the time, but they were only like 14th, even though they were the only undefeated team left. That kind of thing. But these power rankings, NBA power rankings playoff edition, is all about my 1 through 16 rankings of these teams in terms of how likely are they to win an NBA championship. If I had to put these teams in order of which I would put money on them to win an NBA title, these are the order. This is the order in which I would put them in terms of betting. Essentially, that's how the confidence level. 16 I'm the least confident in. 1 I'm the most confident in. Make sense? Let's do it. Number 16 and 15, it's Brooklyn and it's Orlando. Brooklyn just, Karis LeVert's a good player. He's not a go-to scorer in the playoffs. They're playing Toronto. They're playing Toronto. Shouts to them for hanging on to the 17th. It's not going to matter, though. Toronto will make quick work of them, in my opinion. They've got, I've been talking about this for a while. They've found more pieces. They solidified, validated more pieces that can go around Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving next season. I do think that, Karis LeVert's really good. Jared Allen's been great. Joe Harris is sort of that guy that, we'll see if he comes off the bench next year. But he's been that guy that every NBA team has a really great 3-point shooter. Every great NBA team has a really great 3-point shooter, at least in this point in time. At least a lot of them did. Your Ray Allens, your Klay Thompsons, those kind of players. Your big shot makers that, even though you never consider them one of your your best players, at least not next year. Joe Harris is always going to be able to knock down a shot for you, even if it's in crunch time. But at the end of the day, it's not going to really matter for them. Or Orlando, you don't have Jonathan Isaac. Just with that torn ACL, it's just horrible to see him go down again. This is just a mediocre basketball team that didn't play great in the bubble. They get Milwaukee. Milwaukee is really high on this list. So as a result, they're not going to beat Milwaukee. That wouldn't make sense if I put my flag, so to speak, in the Orlando Magic and then put the Bucks in the top 3. But then pick Orlando to win that series. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So I went with Orlando 15th, just because at the end of the day, I think I would bet on that team to win a 7-game series against Brooklyn. But that's for what it's worth. They're both going to lose in the first round. The 14, and they dropped really far, a lot farther than I ever thought they would. But 14th on my list is the Utah Jazz. Scoring looks really difficult for them. Woj yesterday announced that Ed Davis will miss their first round series against the Nuggets. So their depth is even worse than it otherwise would have been. So that's really unfortunate. Bojan Bogdanovic, they have a bunch of on-ball scorers who go around pick and rolls with Rudy Gobert. That's all their offense is right now. They don't have the guy that you feel great about guarding the best player on the other team, LeBron James of the world. The LeBron James is the the Paul George's, Kawhi Leonard's of the world. So they're not going to make it past the first round. Denver's the better basketball team in general this season, but certainly without Bojan Bogdanovic, it just looks so difficult to score enough points for Utah. So I think they'll take a first-round exit pretty easily, and so they went way down here. And I just don't see any scenario in which they could win a title, any scenario in which they could get past the second round. I guess I could convince myself that Donovan Mitchell just has a ridiculous first round and they squeak past Denver, but that's just about all she wrote when it comes to the Utah Jazz. 13, the Dallas Mavericks. I don't think they're all that close to being contending truly. They played the Clippers in the first round, which is a lot of why they're here at 13th. They're young. You can put PG and Kawhi Leonard on Luka. If Luka has an incredible series, then we're talking about Luka being one of the 3 best players in the NBA rather than the 5 best players in the NBA. He's elite and will be for a long time. I don't think they're that close with their performance during clutch games. Clutch games being with the point differential being within 5 points in the last 5 minutes of games. They're really not great this season at all. I think like 8 or 9 games under 500 in those types of games. They'll contend at some point with Kristaps and Luka Doncic at the center of that foundation, but it won't be this year, and they'll lose to the Clippers in the first round. At 12 is the Pacers. Their ceiling just isn't it's only so high without Domantas Sabonis. TJ Warren's great, with TJ Warren and Victor Oladipo and Malcolm Brogdon, you can tell me that they'll at least put up a fight in the first round. I don't think it's completely out of the question that they beat the Heat in the first round. I think it's unlikely considering how high I have the Miami Heat on my list. So I don't think that's actually going to happen. But even if they did manage to get through that first round, they're not going any higher. And I think the Heat have a much better. You can convince me that the Heat have a much better shot of contending for a title than the Pacers. So they're at 12. Oklahoma City. I love this roster in a lot of ways. I love that 3-guard lineup. This is a really good basketball team. Chris Paul has. This is the first time since New Orleans that it's really been his team. Even if he was always calling the shots in LA, you had your Blake Griffins, you had your DeAndre Jordans. It was but out in OKC, and then of course you had James Harden in Houston. But in OKC, it's Chris Paul's team, and everyone's just following him. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is, SGA. He's phenomenal. Dennis Schroeder. That 3-guard lineup has been really lethal. I like Danilo Gallinari. I like Steven Adams a lot. But they're just missing something. We'll see what it actually is in this playoffs. I think whether it's a lockdown defender on the perimeter that's just a little bit bigger than those 3 guards. Maybe it's just a wing that can get his own shot so that you can have a bigger team out there. Because I think the best version of this basketball team is those 3 guards, Danilo Gallinari and Steven Adams, and I'm just not sure who guards LeBron incredibly effectively there, much less who guards, PG and Kawhi Leonard with that lineup. But I think there's reason for Chris Paul to stay, and if it becomes obvious what piece they need to really be a contender again, to really be to cement themselves as one of the top half teams in the Western Conference, then maybe we're talking about a really interesting OKC team for 2020, 2021. But they're 11th. 10th, I went with the Rockets. We're going to find out if fatigue or playoff defense is the reason that James Harden's efficiency numbers drop in the playoffs. He's only had to play 8 games rather than 82, so he shouldn't be tired. He shouldn't be worn out. At the end of the day, though, when PJ Tucker is your center standing at 6'5", that means LeBron is the tallest player on the floor. If LeBron at 6'8" is easily the tallest player on the floor. You have to be bigger in the playoffs. They'll shoot enough threes and score enough points to make things interesting, but I don't think they could have an incredible shooting series and make life difficult for somebody. But I refuse to believe, until the small ball thing works, I refuse to believe that you can put somebody at center who's just 6'5" and actually win playoff series deep in the playoffs. I mean, Anthony Davis, if the Rockets get through round 1 and play the Lakers in round 2, Anthony Davis might average 40 and 17 in that series, because who's going to guard him? Nobody. I mean, somebody might stand next to him while he scores 40, but really shutting down Anthony Davis is almost impossible with the personnel they have on that team. So the Rockets are at 10. With that being said, they have James Harden and Russell Westbrook, so that's a pretty good duo to have, especially on lots of rest and only playing 8 games in the last 4 months. You know what I mean? Number 9, the 76ers. They would be a little higher than this if it weren't for if Ben Simmons hadn't gotten hurt. They're still deep. They still got Embiid, Al Horford, Tobias Harris. They've still got a lot of guys. They're just not going to win it. They're not going to get contend for a title without Ben Simmons. It's just that simple. But they're at 9th. Portland at 8. I think there are 7 teams that you can feel like you can put ahead of these dudes, but I haven't said anybody in the previous 8 that I would pick ahead of Portland to win a title. And I haven't said anybody ahead of Portland that I would pick to beat them in a series. They're a top 5 team in the West when they're healthy. This is a team that went to the conference finals last year with essentially the same team, if not a worse team. You had CJ, Dame, and Nurkic. You've added Carmelo. You've got some, Zach Collins, Yusuf Nurkic, Hassan Whiteside. Interior, you got some depth there. Gary Trent Jr. has become the best shooter on the planet in the bubble. This is arguably a better team when healthy than the team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year. Listen, there's a world in which they beat the Lakers in the first round. And then if they beat the Lakers in the first round, they get Oklahoma City or Houston. I'm not sure I'm taking either of those 2 teams either. There's certainly a scenario in which Portland can get back to the Western Conference Finals. It's unlikely, and considering I have the Lakers in the top 5 here and the top 4, I'm not going to bet on Portland to win that series. I think every year we underestimate LeBron in the playoffs, and I'm not underestimating LeBron in the playoffs ever again until he gives me reason to think of him differently when it comes to the playoffs. But Portland's at 8, Miami at 7. You've got some veteran leadership with young talent. You've got Jimmy Butler and Andre Iguodala. We've seen what he brings to a playoff team. Can Jimmy Butler be the best player on a title contending team. Then you got a bunch of young guys: Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn. What kind of dynamic do they have? They got a lot of young guys who are playing their first playoff game. And then you have Jimmy Butler, who almost went to the finals last season. It's an interesting concoction. They could get hot. I think they'll win their first round series. And that second round series, hypothetically, against the Bucks would be really, really awesome. But, and certainly not a foregone conclusion. If Bam has a really good series against Giannis and Jimmy Butler has a good series, it's certainly not out of the question that they win that series. But it's certainly not likely either. At 6, the Nuggets, with Michael Porter Jr., he might have a really good series against the Jazz just because they've got so many guys there. Denver, that is. You got Rudy Gobert's going to have to guard Nurkic. Somebody's going to have to guard Jamal Murray. You're probably going to get a guy that you feel really good if you're Denver about guarding Michael Porter Jr. because you've got other guys that are dangerous. Will Barton and Gary Harris are out for game 1 of that series, so that's not good. Of course, that's not good even in the slightest. But with that being said, if they get those guys back, there's just so many guys to guard, and Michael Porter Jr. could be really, really great in the first round. This team is really interesting coming back next season if MPJ continues to be as good as he has been in the bubble. I don't think that's out of the question. I mean, certainly he's not going to be averaging 36 and 14 every night, but he was a top prospect for a reason. And if he can remain healthy, he's a very important part of the Denver Nuggets' future. So they're at 6. At 5, we got the Boston Celtics. Most recent update on Kemba Walker suggests he's ready to go without a minutes restriction, which is phenomenal news for Boston. Having a point guard that you can trust in the playoffs is just, it's invaluable. You can't put a value on that. You've got 2 high-level defenders and scorers in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Gordon Hayward, let's just hope that Gordon Hayward doesn't have to go be there for the birth of his child at a really unfortunate time, because that might be something that stops them in their tracks. We'll see. In a perfect world, they get off to a really hot start against Philly, a depleted Philly team. They're up 3-0. Gordon can go and be with his wife as they welcome their new child, and then come back, and it ends up not being that big of a deal. But that's, it could also be at the very beginning of the series when they're playing Toronto in round 2, and then it's a lot more difficult. But they're at 5. At 4, right behind them, I got Toronto. They really are defending their championship. They're not just the most recent. They're not just the reigning. They're the defending, and they're going to come out and they're going to defend. They have all the fixings of a title contender. A great coach, good defense, a go-to scorer, and experienced backcourt play. I'm not sure what else you want. Assuming Pascal Siakam can be that guy in crunch time, then you have guys like OG Anunoby who can go guard the best players on other teams, like Jason Tatum, like Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's not a foregone conclusion that Milwaukee will represent the East because of Toronto and Boston. And I would put Toronto, I think, after the bubble, I think I'll put Toronto right above them in that sort of category. But they're very close, and that's 2 teams that Milwaukee, luckily for Milwaukee, one of those teams is going to get beat by the other, in theory. The point being, they don't absolutely have to beat both teams. They don't, which is very, very helpful for Milwaukee. 3, the Lakers. LeBron's gone deep in the playoffs with a lot worse teams than he's got now. He's got another top 7 player in the NBA on his team, and he's gone much farther than that without that before. That's all I'll say. I'm not going to underestimate him. He doesn't lose early playoff series. He just doesn't. And even though I think the Portland series will be interesting, I think we continue to underestimate LeBron, and the Lakers will win that series. Number 2, the Bucks. As long as Giannis refrains from headbutting anybody else, the Bucks are the favorite in the Eastern Conference. They got the best defense in the league by a wide margin, and probably the MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. Can Chris Middleton be the go-to scorer in the go-to second scorer in the playoffs? Eric Bledsoe, will he be better than he was last postseason? Will you have shooters like Kyle Korver, George Hill, Wesley Matthews shoot well? I think it really helps that Philly isn't going to contend. Because I think Philly is a team that Milwaukee really didn't want to see. They're big, they're tough, they're physical. And with Ben Simmons, I mean, that's a team with Ben Simmons that beat them last year. That's a team they don't want to see. And now that team doesn't exist anymore. That team doesn't exist. Not doesn't exist. That team. That's not the team you'll be putting in the first round of. It's not a team you'll be putting in the playoff because Ben Simmons is out for the season. Ben Simmons out for the season. Excuse me. I misspoke. Toronto lost to Milwaukee lost to Toronto. My apologies. That's not a team they want to see, though. I really don't think that's a team that they want to see. And, I think their chances are improve with that being the case, that they're they're probably not going to see that team, and just the fact that those two teams in the middle of the Eastern Conference don't scare me like the 2 and the 3 seed will, and they really just have to beat one of those teams because one of those teams isn't going to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals alongside of them. And then finally, the Clippers, they're the best team. They're the team I will bet on to win the NBA Finals. They are the team that is the worst matchup for everybody else. They got elite scorers, elite defenders, depth, and they're a team built for the playoffs. That when you shrink that rotation down to 7 players, it's that starting 5 and Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell, and then you go win the title. I think that's pretty easy. They're my favorite to come out of the West. They're my favorite to win the NBA title. Whether it actually happens, I don't know. But what I do know is that they're going to be a nightmare for everybody. And I really hope that we get a Lakers-Clippers Western Conference Finals because that would be awesome. Coming up next, we'll talk about first-round predictions that I have for that series and then get out of here with FYI. We're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Monday. Wrapping up the show here. First, where I want to start is with these first round matchups. We got 4 games today, but we're just going to run through the entire first round. I'll give you my predictions when it comes to my winner and how many games it's going to take. So Milwaukee, Orlando, I'm going to go 4 games. Milwaukee's the better team. The first round in the Eastern Conference, the 1 versus 8 is always a snooze fest. I'm going 4-0 in favor of Milwaukee. Toronto, Brooklyn, also going 4-0. That Toronto defense is just too good for a team that doesn't really have a go-to scorer in the playoffs. That's a 4-0 win for Toronto, in my opinion. Philly, Boston. I'm going to go Boston in 5. Maybe 6, but I'm leaning towards 5. I just don't think this team is good enough without Ben Simmons. Embiid will have a game where he scores 40 and 20, 39 and 18, and it'll get them a win. But with a healthy Kemba Walker, they have, they have the advantage everywhere on the floor, in my opinion, except for that center position, and that's just not going to be good enough for Philly. So I'll go Boston in 5. And then Indiana, Miami. This is a really interesting series. I think with the way TJ Warren is playing, that this will be pretty competitive. I'm going to go Miami in 6, though. First playoff games for some of these Heat players. I think it'll take them just a few minutes, a couple games to really get their feet wet. But I think Miami's the better basketball team, at least with what they're putting on the floor right now. Even though Indiana did end up going 45 and 28, a game better than Miami. I ultimately think Miami's the better basketball team here. So that's my Eastern Conference. In the West, LA and Portland. I think it's going to be interesting. I'm going to go with the Lakers in 6. I do think that Portland will win multiple games in this series. I don't think it'll get to 7. I don't think LeBron will let it. I'll go 4-2 in favor of AD, LeBron, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Clippers, Mavericks. I'm gonna go 5. I think there will be a game where Kristaps and Luka just sort of explodes. Seth Curry has a nice game alongside of them, and they can steal a game. That defense though for the Clippers is going to be too good, too tenacious. And then you put guys like Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell around those other 2 guys. They're 2 stars, and that's just too much for the Mavs. I do think the Mavs will win a game, though. I think they'll squeak out one game there. Utah and Denver. I'm going to go Denver in 5, just because I think Utah is well coached. Donovan Mitchell is spectacular. Rudy Gobert will have a double-double, and you get a good game from Mike Conley, and then you can piece together a win. I think Denver will handle them for the most part, though. And then Houston, OKC. This is tough. I think I'm going to go with 7 games here. I think I'm going to go 7 games for this first round matchup. I think it's going to be the most exciting first round matchup. I think it's a toss-up. It's going to depend on how well Houston shoots the ball. Because if Houston doesn't shoot it well, Steven Adams who's already a double-double machine, is going to be very, very good. And this series, and if that 3-guard lineup, this is a time where where they can play that 3-guard lineup, which I don't think is a good thing for Houston. Letting OKC play that 3-guard lineup with Gallinari and Steven Adams means that you are letting them put the best version of that team on the floor. And I don't think that's a good thing for Houston. I'm going to go OKC in 7. If Houston shoots it well, there's certainly a chance that they win this series. I think it's going to be very close, though. I think it's going to be very close. And then finally, for your information, Tyler Strafaci was 5 down in the first 18 of the U.S. Amateur Championship match yesterday. Came back, won it on the 18th hole, hit the purest 3-iron I've ever seen in my life. 240, threw it way up in the air on the par 5 18th over at Bandon Dunes in Oregon. He had 18-20 feet for birdie. Ollie Osborne wasn't able to get up and down for his eagle, excuse me. Strafaci had a 20-foot eagle putt. Ollie Osborne short right of the green, wasn't able to get up and down. Strafaci won the hole, won the match. And for the second year in a row, Georgia Tech is home to the U.S. Amateur champion. Andy Ogletree won it last year. And both came back from pretty significant deficits. Andy Ogletree was down to John Augenstein out of Vanderbilt last year at Pinehurst. And Strafaci came clawing out of the hole he found himself in the morning 18 against Ali Osborne. He was clutch on 18. He had a couple, he had some nice breaks. A guy lost the hole on 18 because his caddy touched the bunker. And then Aman Gupta took 3 shots to get out of the bunker on 18 when their match was tied in the quarterfinals. There was a lot of, the semifinals, I think. And then he was able to win the hole on 18 on Sunday to win the U.S. Amateur in the second straight for the Yellow Jackets. Let me tell you what the schedule is for the NBA today. Monday, August 17th, 12:30. You got the Jazz and Nuggets, 3 Nets and Raptors, 5:30 the Sixers and Celtics, the best one of the day. And then the nightcap, Mavericks, Clippers at 8 p.m. Central. That's 9 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, Tuesday, Thursday, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring, Around the Bases with Chris Brown. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for joining me. Hopefully we'll have a better technical situation on Wednesday and we can actually have a live show. But thank you so much for joining us. 110sportsmedia.com. Follow the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/110sports. Really helps us out. And I'll see you on Wednesday. Take care. I'll see you then.